This week for my D&D game, I needed a special model that I couldn't really find anywhere else. So this week on the Storycraft Society, we are going to be crafting that particular model. Let's jump into it. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name is Garmin. This is the Storycraft Society, and like I said in the intro, I need to make a model for my D&D game this week. I don't think that this particular monster is anything that is super mind-blowing for any of you GMs out there, but I think it's going to be a fun little project, and I will say very quickly at the beginning of this video, I'm going to gloss over what the model slash monster is that I'm making, because that's going to be important to the crafting of it. But then at the end of the video, I will do a whole segment on the custom stat block that I made for this monster and go a little bit more in depth on the lore of what it is and why I am using it. If that is something that is interesting to you, watch till the end of the video. If you're only interested in the crafting, you only have to watch the crafting part. And if you're just interested in the monster stat block, you can fast forward to that at the end of the video. With that said, I'm going to dive into talking about what the model slash monster is, and then we can dive into making it. So one of my player characters is a swordsman, and they have a lineage of swordsmanship built into their backstory. These statues, these animated statues, are basically training dummies for that lineage of swordsmanship. So more specifically, what they are is training dummies for swordsmen who focus on dexterous action. The way that I decided to do that is that they have gemstones that are target zones on their body that help you to defeat it faster. And that's why it's been kind of difficult for me to find a model that fits this exact thing. And it's also worth mentioning that the player character is an elf, so I wanted it to be an elf statue, not just a regular old statue. And this art that I found online, I doctored up by adding the gemstones to it, is nothing spectacular. It just gives my players the idea of what is, in the turn order as we're playing D&D. Now, as far as the crafting of the statue goes, I'm gonna be starting with a 3D printed model. Actually, shout out Bill. He got a new 3D printer and he's been doing a whole bunch of test prints, and he printed this elf model for me, which is really convenient and useful. It's slightly larger than what we use for typical D&D scale. What that gives me is the perfect opportunity to make this one of those special statues. Another thing that I really like about this model is that the hands are facing outward, so it's going to allow me to make those cool gemstones stand out on the statue itself. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to be making a foam base for it. So the way that is going to work is I have a whole bunch of these pieces of foam cut out. Now, I've been pretty vocal about this on the channel. I'm not a huge fan of talking about the sizes of things because I think it's just as simple as eye it up and then do something that you feel looks the best. I made this slightly larger piece with a middle piece and then a high piece. This one and this one are the same size this direction. And then I have all of these little faces that are going to end up going on to this, like so. Another thing that I did is I like for my models to have a little bit of weight, and that compared to this guy who's gonna definitely make this thing top heavy. I have these nuts, and this nut is going to fit down into this piece, which is gonna be the bottom, and then this one is going to fit into here, which is the middle one, and that is gonna help to weigh this down so that it won't rock and tilt over. So the first thing that I have to deal with is that this model does not have a base. So the way that I'm going to deal with that is I'm going to pull out my 2-part epoxy. I guess for those who don't know what this stuff is it is curing epoxy. I think it's epoxy. Whatever it is, it's 2 parts in blue and yellow, and as you mix it together, it turns green, and then it will cure. It takes a little while for it to cure, but then it gets super hard. But it starts out very sticky, and it'll stick to stuff almost like a glue. Now I'm gonna pull out a piece of parchment paper so that this can dry and it won't stick. And then with a slightly wet finger, I will shape it in place. And what's nice is the water will cause it not to stick quite so bad, but will not stop it from curing. And also, because this is supposed to be like shaped metal, it does not have to be perfect. So it can kind of look lumpy, like lumpy metal. All right, so then there's that. And now what I want to do is take my statue here and I'm going to set his feet down into it like that. So actually I'm having more of an issue than I thought because it's not wanting to stay up and stay flat because the statue is pulling it all over the place. So this is what I ended up settling on, and what that actually is just I'm using all of my paint bottles to help hold the model up so that the base will dry. That's definitely gonna take a little bit of time for it to dry, but while that's curing, that will let me turn over and start working on the pedestal base. All right, the first thing that I did was I got the nuts embedded into these two pieces, and as you can see, they will get blocked up like that, so you won't be able to see what is necessarily underneath, but it does add a lot of weight to the base of this piece. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to pull out my tinfoil ball and I'm gonna start to texture all of these areas, and that's going to get my stone texture, and it'll be way easier to texture these with them all separate than it is to get them textured once they're all put together. With those all textured up, now it's time to start hot gluing them together. And this is not anything fancy, but just putting the hot glue onto the base here and then gluing that on, just being careful to try to center it up top. Now that leaves me with this deep hole right here. What I'm gonna do is just take and put so much hot glue down in there that it comes basically out the hole there like that, and then that's definitely going to make this a nice solid piece. It's certainly not going to come apart. Now I made these little super thin faces because I wanted there to be a little bit more diversity than just this flat bit right here. So these obviously are going to fit in like that, or maybe that's not necessarily obvious, but the way that I want these to get textured up and make that look a little bit more three-dimensional is I'm gonna start by getting them textured. Then I'm going to pull out this tool here, and I'm going to use that to just puncture lines. It's a little too wide for right there, so I'll grab my thin one, and that will let me do that same thing. And now I can pop that out, and it makes this, whoop, got a little straggler there. And now what it did was it made this little face so that when I put that on here, it gives me a little bit of 3D to the piece. So now I'm gonna hot glue all those on, and then I'll check back in. And so with those all put on, this is what the bottom base looks like. I'm not like gonna make any claims that I think that this is like internet breaking, but it does look nice. And I think that it will be perfect once we get the statue up on top. All right, so it is the next morning and our statue has dried up nicely. Now we have our base and our statue ready to be base coated. So what we're gonna do is we're going to base coat our foam out with Blackmagic Craft Base Coat. This is just a 50-50 mixture of black acrylic craft paint and matte Mod Podge. Then for our statue, we're gonna take and spray that with just a black rattle can primer. Nothing fancy here, just get it to being a black color. From there, then we have to get both of them painted up. The way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to throw a couple different colors of gray over top of the stone. And for the statue, I'm going to paint it out in bronze with a dry brushing of a very, very light gold over the top of it, just to get a little bit of highlights to show up. So I got the platform all done, nothing fancy here. That was easy. And then there were two changes to the paint plan when it came to my statue here. So the first one was, instead of going with a gold and then a light gold, I ended up going with a gold and a silver. I really wanted the highlights to pop, because the second change that I made was I mixed together this spring green and this sky blue, and I used those to make a wash that I did to make the patina over top of the whole thing. That is what gives it that like weathered bronze brass kind of look. I'm real pleased with how that turned out, but now what we need to do is we need to move on to the blue gemstones that are going to be on the figure's hands and then in their chest there. So the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to break out this sky blue again. And what I'm going to do is take and put a dot of it onto my palette. Actually, if you notice, it's got like water and stuff in it, so I got to shake it back up again. There we go. I got a better situation there. And then the next thing that I'm doing is I brought out a not super pointed, but not super blunt tipped brush. What I'm going to do with that is get a ball of paint on the end of it. You can see that. And then what I'm going to do is tap that to the back of the hand to make just a little dot. And now that I have all those in place, I'm going to let those dry. The final step of getting the gemstones all put together is I'm going to pull out this UV curing resin, my UV flashlight, and then I am going to pull out this blue ink. I'm going to use that to color the resin. Now, one thing that I'm going to say as a disclaimer here is that you do not need any of these fancy tools to do a build like this, but just being very bluntly honest, the fact that I have Olivia, who is a miniature painter, who has all of these inks and high quality miniature paints, it just makes it a lot easier. There isn't a whole lot that I can say that is justifiable to that other than if you don't have these tools, it's okay. It'll take you a little bit of time to acquire them and you'll slowly build them up over time. And just know you can absolutely do anything even if you don't have the tools. With that said, that little disclaimer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my UV resin here and I'm going to pour out just a small little bit of it. And then I'm going to put a dot of my blue ink next to it. And when it comes to working with ink, that actually probably is way too much. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a toothpick and I'm going to dip it in the ink and then I'll start mixing that in to the resin, and you can see how quickly that colors it, even if there's just a little bit there. And we don't want the gemstone to be totally opaque, so we're going to just mix this up until we get to a color we're happy with, and then I will move on to the application. So now you can see that I've got the resin tinted just to be kind of a faint blue color. That's going to help sell my gemstone look. And then what I'm going to do is take my toothpick, and again, I'm going to get a glob of it onto the end, and then I'm going to move over to my model, and I'm going to touch that to get it to bubble out. So now there's a gemstone sticking out of the hand. Once I do that, then I'm going to cure it with my UV flashlight. And now if we look, we have a gemstone that is sticking out of the back of our model's hand. And now here is our model with the 3 gemstones attached to the hands and the chest that are going to be perfect for this scenario. Now what we have to do is we have to get him attached to the base, and that should be really simple. I'm figuring it's just going to be a little bit of hot glue and he'll glue down on there, and then I think the model will be done. All right, so if you are here just for the story crafting, if you are here for just the story crafting, then you're excused because that's the end. This is what I came up with. This is the final product, and I am super, super pumped with it. If you are here for the story crafting, buckle up because now we're going to start talking about this cool monster that I came up with. So I'm not even sure the monster is the right term, but construct thing that my players are going to fight. So one of my players is a blade singer. In my world, blade singers are called LTL, and this is a long forgotten style of fighting. This particular PC has had this fighting style passed down from father to son to father to son for generations inside of their family, and that's the only reason that he is one of the only ones left doing it. There's also a whole bunch of lore reasons that I'm not going to share, just in case any of my other players are watching this video, as to why there are so few blade singers left. So what I needed to do is I needed to come up with some kind of a challenge inside of the game for this particular character to overcome, to allow them to advance their personal training. And what better than literally the direct thing that their ancestors trained on, which is the LTL training statue. I needed this thing to do a bunch of things, and and boy, their stat block shows it. Now, I'm not going to go over all the super nitty-gritty stuff. I will throw the full stat block up on screen for anybody who is interested, but I am going to go over what abilities and things they have. That way you can decide if this monster is as cool for you as it is for me. So let's start with its armor class. So its armor class is 13, but if you notice, it also has a 20 AC for the gems. That's very important. We're going to get to that later. It has 185 hit points, but that is just absolutely not true. It easily has double that. We'll get to that in a second. Its speed is 30 feet. Its stats are what its stats are. It has some skills, and I'm not going to go over all of those, but the one that's the most important is it actually has deception. And the reason for that is I'm sure that there were blade singers in the past that had similar things to insightful fighting, where you can make an insight check against your target's deception, and then that will give you certain advantages against fighting it. So I don't necessarily think that my statues are going to be lying to my players per se, but they are going to be able to hide and mask what they're getting ready to do just a little bit. So in order to get that, I had to use expertise in deception. Remember how I said that 185 hit points is not a good representation of how many hit points this particular construct has? Well, that's because of the next thing, and that's the damage resistances. So if you notice, it is outright resistant to all damage from non-adamantine weapons. All damage, which means that any damage that comes in and attacks just the statue itself is going to only be doing half damage. So that 185 is actually way higher than that. Whatever double that is, I'm not going to pretend to do the math right now. But then also it is totally outright immune to non-magical attacks. And the way that I flavor that is young LTL, when they were first training against these statues, one of the first things they would learn is something like Booming Blade that would make their regular non-magical attacks magical, and they would need to be using that over and over and over again to make sure that they were able to do something to the statue. It's got a ton of condition immunities because it is a statue, but then that moves us on all the way to the bottom, which is it is built for training. So what does that mean? Well, whenever the training statue can't engage a target on its turn, it's going to take the dodge action, which again is now going to make that trying to hit it way harder. For that kind of fighter that wants to run in and run out and run in and run out, think of like someone with the mobile feat. The statue is made to be prepared for that, and that is going to make the statue much harder to hit if you don't stay permanently engaged with it. The back half of Built for Training is that the training statue was not intended to harm the person that it was training with, right? It wasn't trying to kill the other LTL, it was just trying to help them train. So if, for whatever reason, it drops them to 0 hit points, it will spend its next immediate action casting Cure Wounds on the target to get them back up and ready to spar again. It does have a damage threshold. So again, that 185, not a good example because you have to do a minimum of 5 points of damage to it for it even to register that the damage did anything. Definitely need to keep the damage up. Another thing is because it is a statue, it has false appearance, which means that if it's just standing still, there's no way that anyone could know that it was an animated statue. And then I'm going to skip over gemstone targets for just 1 second. That's the last one we'll do for abilities, just so that I can talk about its innate spellcasting. It only has Cure Wounds at will, and it has 3 per training session. So every time it is activated, 3 times it can cast Bigby's Hand, and that is 3 times per training session. So once it deactivates, once it reactivates again, it can then cast 3 more of those. So let's move on to the big boy, which is the gemstone targets, and that's really the core mechanic of this particular monster. So each training statue is outfitted with 3 gemstone targets. Now, I did not say exactly where they are, that way each DM who would ever want to use this monster could put them wherever they wanted, but for me, 1 is on the back of each hand, and then 1 is on the center of the chest. They all faintly glow. Again, mine glow blue, but yours could glow whatever color you think would fit your game the best. And then each gemstone is an object with an AC of 20, 15 hit points, and resistance to all damage not made with adamantine weapons. If you wanted to take one of these down fast, adamantine weapons is definitely the way to do it. But in this particular example, they are going to be taking half damage from everything. Now, the point of these is that it is a training dummy, so there's hard to hit targets that will allow you to take the training dummy down faster. So if you can hit this AC 20, which is much harder to hit than its basic AC of 13, then that will allow you to, in 15, 30, 45, and then double that now, 90 points of damage, unless you're dealing with adamantine weapons. After 90 points of damage, you can take this training statue down, which is a heck of a lot faster than the 185 times 2, not including the stuff that has damage resistances. And the gemstones do not have the damage threshold, which means that the gemstones, if you do 1 point of damage to them, they take 1 point of damage, halved, but that actually would still stay as 1. But if you do 2 points of damage to it, it will still take 1 point of damage. Now, once all of the gemstones become inactive, the way they become inactive is by you reducing them to 0 hit points, then the statue goes down inactive. And now you have beat it. And it's going to stay inactive for about 10 minutes until it comes back online again, ready for the next training session. Another way that you can deactivate these is you could cast a 4th level or higher Dispel Magic on it, which would have the same effect as dismantling all of the gemstones. Very boring. It has multi-attack, which allows it to do 2 of its melee slam attacks. But then the final thing that it has is a cool reaction that, obviously, because of the reaction, once per turn, they can take 1 attack that comes in against it, and they can raise their AC for that attack by 5. This only affects the gemstones by 2. So 1 time per turn, they can raise the AC of their gems against 1 attack to 22, and raise their basic AC to 18. But that's it. That is the cool LTL training statue stat block and model. I'm really pleased with the way that this turned out, and hopefully if you stuck along through the whole video, you enjoyed this. If you only watched the first part, I appreciate you. If you just watched the second part for the stat block, I appreciate you just as much, and hopefully you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did do all of the YouTube stuff, definitely leave a comment down below, leave this video a like, share this video with a friend that you think would enjoy it. But that's it for this week. That's all I've got. So until next week, Nachtan Bian.